Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My dear brothers and sisters, before we begin today, I want you to take a deep breath and ask yourself a question you may have never asked before. If I say I'm a Muslim, how well do I actually know my Islam? Because the truth is, many of us pray without understanding, worship without knowledge, and live our lives assuming we already know enough. But assumptions don't bring us close to Allah. Knowledge does. Today, I want to take you on a journey, one that may challenge you, awaken you, and transform the way you look at your faith forever. This is not just another reminder, not just another motivational talk. This is a mirror that reflects our reality. We are living in a world filled with distractions, doubts, and endless responsibilities. But the greatest responsibility, learning our Deen, is often the one we delay the most. So stay with me till the end, because by the time we finish, you will understand something powerful. Studying the Deen is not a luxury. It is your lifeline. It is the anchor that keeps your heart steady. It is the light that guides your steps. It is the path that leads you back to Allah. If you've ever felt lost, distant, confused, or spiritually empty, if you've ever prayed without feeling it, worshipped without understanding, or lived without direction, this message is for you. And it might just be the reminder that changes everything. Let's begin. Knowledge comes before action, because every act of worship, every moral choice, every intention, and every step toward Allah must be guided by clarity, not guesswork. When we talk about learning the Deen, we're not referring to becoming a scholar overnight or memorizing thousands of rulings. We're talking about something far more fundamental, understanding what Allah wants from us. Before a person prays, they must know how to pray. Before they purify themselves, they must know the rules of purity. Before they earn, spend, marry, speak, or lead, they must know what is halal and what is haram. Without knowledge, a person may worship incorrectly, fall into sin without realizing it, or live a life guided by culture, desire, or hearsay rather than truth. This is why the scholars said, knowledge is the foundation of all deeds, because actions without understanding are like a house built on sand, unstable, uncertain, and easily destroyed. When a believer seeks knowledge, they are not learning facts, they are learning purpose. They begin to understand why Allah commands what He commands and why He prohibits what He prohibits. They recognize that the rules of Allah are not restrictions but directions toward peace and goodness. A person who knows the wisdom behind prayer prays differently. A person who knows the meaning of Tawheed worships differently. A person who understands the seriousness of backbiting speaks differently. This transformation only happens when the heart and mind are illuminated with knowledge. Without knowledge, a person may live in a state of spiritual negligence. They might pray but rush through it, not knowing what they're saying or why it matters. They might obey Allah in some things and disobey Him in others, simply because they never learned the proper rulings. Sometimes people rely on assumptions, traditions, or random opinions they hear from others. But assumptions cannot lead a person to Allah. Knowledge does. Learning the Deen removes blind imitation and replaces it with conviction. Conviction is what strengthens faith, anchors belief, and gives a person stability in worship. True knowledge also protects a person from doubts. In a world full of conflicting voices, ideologies, misinformation, and confusion, a person who doesn't know their Deen becomes vulnerable. They may hear a question about Islam and suddenly feel shaken, not because the question is strong, but because their foundation is weak. When a heart is empty, any doubt can enter. But when a heart is filled with strong knowledge, doubts dissolve before they can settle. Knowledge becomes a shield, a weapon, and a source of confidence that strengthens the believer internally. Another reason knowledge comes before action is that intention itself requires understanding. A person cannot purify their intention if they don't know what sincerity truly means. They cannot avoid riyah, showing off, if they don't recognize its forms. They cannot dedicate their deeds to Allah alone until they understand the beauty of worship and the nature of their relationship with Him. Knowledge shapes intention, and intention shapes the value of every action a person performs. Knowledge also beautifies character. When a believer learns about the mercy of Allah, they become more merciful. When they study the patience of the prophets, they become more patient. When they understand the seriousness of harming others, they become gentler and more cautious. Knowledge refines the soul in ways that actions alone cannot. A person may perform many deeds but still carry arrogance, harshness, or heedlessness. Knowledge softens the heart, reminds it of humility, and keeps it connected to Allah with awareness rather than routine. Finally, knowledge gives meaning to life. It reminds the believer that every breath, every moment, and every action can become a form of worship when done with the right understanding. It turns ordinary days into opportunities for closeness to Allah. This is why seeking knowledge is not optional, it is essential. It is the light that guides every action and the foundation upon which a life of faith is built. Studying the Deen is not optional because every human being is created with a purpose, and understanding that purpose requires knowledge. When Allah sent us to this world, He did not leave us to figure out life on our own. He revealed a complete guidance that teaches us how to worship, how to live, how to interact with people, and how to build a relationship with Him. This guidance is not meant for a select group of learned people, it is meant for every Muslim. If a person does not know what Allah expects from them, how can they fulfill their obligations? How can they avoid sins? How can they worship correctly? This is why seeking knowledge of the basics of Islam is fard, an obligation on every individual. It is a responsibility tied to our identity as believers. Many people think studying the Deen is for scholars, imams, or students of knowledge, but that idea creates a dangerous gap. Every Muslim, regardless of age, background, or profession, needs at least enough knowledge to live their daily life according to the commands of Allah. A person who earns money must know what business practices are halal and what are haram. A person who prays must know the correct method of salah. A person who speaks must understand the rulings around backbiting, lying, slander, and gossip. A person raising children must know how to raise them according to Islamic manners and values. Without this foundational knowledge, a believer's actions may be done incorrectly or even harmfully without them realizing it. Ignorance is not an excuse because Allah has made knowledge accessible. In earlier generations, people would travel months just to learn one hadith or clarify a single ruling. Today, we have access to Quran translations, tafsir, authentic lectures, Islamic institutes, online classes, and countless books. When Allah provides so many resources and conveniences, a person can no longer justify not learning. On the day of judgment, excuses like I was busy, I didn't have time, or I thought I already knew enough will hold no weight. Life is filled with responsibilities, but none of them can outweigh the responsibility we have toward the one who created us, sustains us, and will hold us accountable. When believers neglect studying the Deen, they slowly drift into living Islam culturally rather than consciously. They follow traditions instead of teachings. They perform acts of worship because they saw their parents doing them, not because they understand their meaning or ruling. This creates a weak relationship with Allah. The heart becomes dry, actions become mechanical, and faith becomes fragile. But when a person learns even a little with sincerity, the heart awakens. They begin to worship with awareness, live with purpose, and make choices that reflect obedience to Allah. Learning the Deen also creates balance. Without knowledge, people tend to fall into extremes, either becoming overly strict without understanding mercy, or becoming too relaxed without understanding boundaries. Knowledge teaches moderation, perspective, and wisdom. It helps a believer walk the path of Islam with clarity and steadiness. Another reason learning is a responsibility is that every believer influences others, whether they realize it or not. Parents teach their children, friends advise each other, spouses guide one another. Even a single statement someone makes can impact another person's life. When a believer learns properly, they guide others properly. When they remain ignorant, they may unintentionally mislead someone. This is why gaining correct knowledge is a duty, not only for oneself, but also because others may depend on your understanding. Ultimately, studying the Deen protects a person's worship, character, relationships, and afterlife. It ensures that their journey to Allah is based on truth, not assumptions. Islam is not something we practice only when convenient. It is the very purpose of our existence. Recognizing this transforms learning the Deen from an optional activity into a moral and spiritual responsibility that every believer must carry. Studying the Deen purifies the heart and transforms character because knowledge is not merely information, it is nourishment for the soul. When a believer learns about Allah, His names, His mercy, His wisdom, and His commands, something begins to shift internally. Knowledge enters through the mind but settles in the heart. And once the heart is touched, the entire person changes. This transformation is not instant, but gradual and deep. The heart becomes softer, more aware, more connected, and more humble. Without knowledge, the heart remains dry, distracted, and trapped in habits or emotions that distance it from Allah. But when knowledge enters, the heart wakes up from its sleep. One of the ways knowledge purifies the heart is by reminding a person who they truly are, a servant of Allah. When someone learns about the greatness of Allah, they stop being arrogant. When they learn about His forgiveness, they stop drowning in guilt. When they learn about His warnings, they stop taking sins lightly. When they learn about His blessings, they become more grateful. Each piece of knowledge creates a shift in the heart. A person begins to feel accountable yet hopeful, cautious yet comforted, humbled yet honored. This balance can only come through learning. Knowledge also protects the heart from diseases like envy, pride, anger, and hypocrisy. For example, when someone learns about the gravity of backbiting, their tongue becomes careful. When they learn the reward of patience, they react differently to hardships. When they learn the rulings on financial dealings, their earnings become pure, and purity of income brings purity of heart. Each ruling, each verse, each hadith shapes behavior in a way that brings the heart closer to Allah and cleanses it from negative traits. Character transformation is one of the most beautiful results of learning the Deen. When a believer studies the life of the Prophet, his mercy, his patience, his gentleness, his honesty, his forgiveness, they naturally start adopting his qualities. Learning about the manners taught in the Quran softens a person from within. Instead of reacting impulsively, they learn to respond with wisdom. Instead of holding grudges, they learn the virtue of letting go. Instead of complaining, they learn gratitude. Instead of seeking validation from people, they learn reliance on Allah. Knowledge becomes a mirror that shows them who they are and who they need to become. Another way knowledge transforms the heart is by creating a deeper understanding of worship. When someone learns the meaning behind the words they recite in Salah, their prayer becomes sweeter. When they understand the purpose of fasting, they experience it spiritually rather than just physically. When they learn the rewards of charity, they give with sincerity and joy. Knowledge turns rituals into heartfelt devotion. Worship becomes alive, meaningful, and transformative. The heart becomes attached to Allah in a way that changes a person's daily life, attitudes, priorities, and decisions. Studying the Deen also brings tranquility. When the heart is confused, knowledge brings clarity. When the heart is burdened, knowledge brings relief. When the heart feels distant, knowledge brings closeness. The Quran describes itself as a healing for the heart, and healing only takes place when one understands what they are reading. Knowledge of the Deen helps a believer navigate through trials without losing peace. They understand that hardship is a test, that patience is rewarded, and that Allah is always near. This understanding strengthens the heart and prevents it from falling apart during difficulties. Finally, knowledge creates consistency in a believer's actions. When someone understands the value of good deeds and the consequences of sins, their heart becomes disciplined. They begin to make choices not based on impulses but based on faith. This consistency builds strength and integrity. The heart becomes free from slavery to desires and becomes a servant of Allah alone. This is why studying the Deen is essential for purification and transformation. It is the process that shapes the inner self into someone who not only believes but lives that belief with beauty, sincerity, and excellence. Learning the Deen strengthens faith in a confusing world because knowledge is the anchor that holds the heart steady amidst waves of doubts, temptations, and shifting morals. We live in a time where right and wrong are constantly questioned, where opinions change overnight, and where people often follow trends instead of truth. In such an environment, a believer who lacks proper knowledge becomes vulnerable. They may feel uncertain about their own beliefs, shaken by every new idea, or pressured by society to compromise their values. But when someone understands their Deen deeply, they stand firm even when the world changes around them. Knowledge gives stability, clarity, and confidence that nothing else can offer. Confusion often enters the heart when a person does not know why something is allowed or forbidden, why certain acts are encouraged, or why Allah commands what He commands. Without understanding, Islam may begin to feel restrictive or outdated in the eyes of the uninformed. However, when someone learns the wisdom, purpose, and beauty behind Allah's laws, they begin to see that every command is rooted in mercy, justice, and goodness. Knowledge replaces confusion with insight. Instead of feeling pressured by opposing voices, a believer feels grounded and aware because they understand the bigger picture. Another reason knowledge strengthens faith is that it exposes false ideas before they can take root. Many doubts in our time come not from evidence but from misinformation, superficial arguments, or misunderstandings. A person with proper knowledge can recognize weak arguments, identify contradictions, and remain unshaken. They understand the Quran correctly. They know authentic teachings from fabrications, and they can distinguish between cultural practices and real Islamic principles. Their heart becomes protected from confusion the way a shield protects the body. Doubts may come, but they do not stay because knowledge gives the believer the tools to see through them. Learning the Deen also gives clarity in moral decisions. In a world where everyone promotes their own definition of success, happiness, freedom, and identity, it becomes difficult to know which voice to follow. Some people follow desires, others follow trends, and many follow whatever brings immediate comfort. But a heart guided by Islamic knowledge follows what is true, not what is popular. It follows what brings long-term peace, not temporary pleasure. Knowledge helps the believer navigate modern issues, family challenges, societal pressures, financial decisions, friendships, work environments. Without compromising their values, it becomes a compass pointing toward the pleasure of Allah, no matter how noisy the world becomes. A believer with knowledge also gains inner stability. When a person does not know their Deen, their faith depends on emotions. They feel spiritual when life is good, and they feel weak when life is difficult. Their connection with Allah rises and falls based on circumstances. But when faith is grounded in knowledge, it becomes steady. They worship with understanding, not just emotion. They trust Allah with conviction, not just hope. They face hardship with patience because they know the promise of Allah. They resist temptation because they know the consequences and the reward. Knowledge makes faith consistent and reliable. Another benefit of learning the Deen is protection from identity loss. Many people today feel lost because they don't know who they are or what they stand for. They are influenced by media, trends, and opinions without realizing how it shapes them. But when someone learns their Deen, they gain a strong sense of identity. They know they are servants of Allah, followers of His Messenger, and carriers of a timeless message. This identity gives strength, dignity, and purpose. It keeps the believer from feeling inferior or pressured to imitate others just to fit in. Knowledge also strengthens faith by deepening love for Allah. When a person learns about Allah's names and attributes, His mercy, His forgiveness, His justice, His promises, and His blessings, their heart naturally becomes attached to Him. Love creates loyalty. Loyalty creates strength. A heart filled with love for Allah cannot be easily shaken by doubts or temptations. The more one knows Allah, the more unshakable their faith becomes. In the end, studying the Deen becomes a shield, a light, and a foundation that keeps the believer strong in a world full of distractions and confusion. Knowledge gives the clarity needed to walk the straight path with confidence, peace, and unwavering conviction. My dear brothers and sisters, studying the Deen is the lifeline of a believer. It is not something we turn to only when we feel inspired. It is something we commit to because our souls depend on it. Knowledge guides our actions, protects our hearts, and strengthens our faith in ways nothing else can. When we learn, we worship with understanding. When we understand, we practice with sincerity. And when we practice sincerely, we draw closer to Allah with every step. The world around us will continue to change, distract, confuse, and challenge us, but the one who holds firmly to knowledge stands firm, calm, and steady because they know who they are, who they worship, and why they live this life. So take this responsibility seriously. Learn your Deen not for people, not for reputation, but for the one who created you, guided you, and will question you. Begin small, stay sincere, stay consistent, and let knowledge illuminate your path toward Allah. Thank you for giving your time heart, and attention to this message. May Allah place barakah in your efforts, open doors of knowledge for you, and make your journey toward Him filled with clarity, strength, and peace. Good luck on your path of seeking knowledge and inspiring others. May every step you take bring you closer to Allah, elevate your character, and benefit your heart in this life and the next. Jazakumullahu khairan, and may Allah reward you abundantly.